There's still a couple here. Chameleonaire, you're on. When are you on stage? At 3? No, 3 o'clock. And you're going to be performing from your unreleased new album, I understand. Is that correct? If we ask you nicely, will you? Yes. Oh, excellent. Okay. You'll juggle. All right. I'm going to start as soon as you guys are quiet enough for us to do that. How about just one song? Jeff is going to do it. Yeah. Oh. Is this mic on? Is he mic'd? Can I have this mic on? I'm good. I've got everything I need. All right, we're starting. You guys will settle down eventually. I'd like to welcome James Lamberti, the VP of Marketing from InMobi, on stage. James? Hey guys, seriously, if you want to talk, don't.
We're talking, right? I can't hear you. Got me back there? Hear me all right? Sounds good? Yeah.
Why don't we go ahead and throw the first slide up, just to have it up there, and the title slide.
Here we go.
So James is I'm up here mostly just to facilitate the flow of data from him to you. This isn't so much of an interview as I think it's going to be a fascinating glimpse into the mobile advertising world that I'm sure, unless you work at a mobile advertising company at scale, you've never seen data like this before. I certainly haven't until a few minutes ago backstage when we were going through it. James is an executive at InMobi, and InMobi is, I guess technically it's an Indian company, right? Are you actually headquartered there?
I mean, we have 6 offices around the world, so we're actually incorporated in several countries, technically, but it started in India.
Yeah, but you've raised money from Kleiner Perkins.
Kleiner Perkins and Sherpalo.
Yeah, and Sherpalo, and so you have California funding.
Yep.
And you do business in all over the world,
exactly.
Including the U.S. Starting this year, you started doing getting into mobile advertising here.
Right.
InMobi is really interesting because they're the only that I know of at scale independent mobile advertising network, and meaning they aren't owned by someone else and they don't have other lines of business. We've had a fascinating series of posts about how you guys may be benefiting more than anyone from some of the changes that Apple is implementing that seem to be directed at Google and ad mobs,
right.
But which haven't been implemented yet, and we'll see how that plays out.
Right.
But regardless of all that, you have a ton of data because you're serving mobile ads all over the planet, including Africa, everywhere.
Exactly.
And you're going to share some of that data.
Yeah, I'll share some insights. I mean, this is very particular to you and TechCrunch because I think this is a bit of a teaser on us really aggressively starting to roll out data that really helps educate the market. And we think we can do it in a more authentic way just because the footprint of the network is so huge, and we don't have any one angle we're pursuing, right? We're not, trying to drive Android like Google. We're not trying to drive iPhone like iAd. And we have a huge global footprint. So we're really a very broad network focused on every angle. So this is really giving you, doing some myth busting as well.
We have this system for hand signals where if I do this, you go to the next slide, but there has to be someone watching me.
So if you look around the world, I think the first interesting point to make is the reality of eCPMs around the world. So there's a lot of myths out there. Even after your posts, we saw people saying, eCPMs in certain parts of the world are 1/100th, or I even saw 1/1000th was actually a statement I saw. Not true. So let's just talk about that myth. And there's a lot of reasons in this discussion why I think you don't see the disparity around the world in terms of eCPMs that people expect. So these markets and the value they possess in mobile advertising.
What are we looking at here? This is
so let me show you.
Ads.
So we're a display network. So what we're looking at is the development, the eCPM development around the world in the various countries. So the average eCPM around the world would be indexed at 100. And what this data is telling you is that Europe is averaging close to 30% higher than the average around the world, and that Africa is about 30 points lower. The key is that the disparity or the delta in eCPMs globally is not as great as we'd expect. And you also have a situation where I think some surprises.
The index is great, but what are the actual 100? What is that in dollars?
Well, I mean, we're not going to talk about absolutes per se, because I think I want to help underscore the value.
I thought we were going to show some data.
Well, we can show the impression volume on the next slide.
Wait, hold on before we do that.
Yeah.
Give me a ballpark here. Is 100?
Well, you're talking about
20 cents?
No, you're talking about.
Is 100 a dollar?
No, so we're not going to give you absolutes. We talked
Give
about
me a range. I mean, just seriously, some kind of range. Do we know?
Well, they range between 30, 40 cents and a few dollars.
30, 40 cents
range around the world.
Yeah. And so what would 100 be? Would that be
people know what the eCPMs are, Mike.
They do?
Yeah.
I don't. I actually don't. Well, if everyone knows, let's just. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Apparently, I'm the only one that doesn't know.
The point is, you got to look at.
The point is that there's a business in Africa.
Well, the point is there's huge business in global.
Yeah.
And the other point is that the myth of the value of these markets, and I think the American-centric view of the world is not correct when it comes to mobile on many dimensions.
The next slide actually shows that not only is our prices okay in Africa, but there's actually impressions as well. Is that?
Well, just think about, so in terms of the volume of impressions on our network, and you can see we started in Africa and Asia, so we have mature businesses there. US impression volume will probably double and triple for us over the next couple months. But the bottom line is, in terms of the representation around the world that we possess, it's pretty substantial. So by comparison, AdMob's at 7 or 8 billion in the US. We're at 2 billion right now. We just launched a couple months ago. So I think the point of this conversation and what I really want to make sure people take away is that this disparity that people believe exists doesn't exist. It's a myth. And there's a lot of reasons for that make sense when you step back and you look at the world and what's happening. I mean, if you go to the next slide, let's look at some country level data. So here's a ranking of the top 20 markets. And what drives these performances is pretty interesting, right? So Australia, and the way we talk about it is to look at several dimensions. There's obviously advertiser demand. There's also supply. So in Europe, you have really high-performing markets because you have built-in segmentation, right? You've got Germany, it's its own segment, if you will. It creates constraint in inventory and drives up pricing. Australia is a great pocket where you've got very strong adoption of the iPhone. You've got a high level of advertiser interest, and it's a good advertising market. So all those factors combine to make it a really interesting market. It's clearly not as big population-wise as the US, but very valuable. Malaysia is an interesting case study, right? Very different reasons why Malaysia performs extremely well. The consumer behavior is important in that market because what you have is you don't have any other way for the consumer to engage with digital content. It's not like TVs and fixed web are everywhere in Africa and Asia. So those parts of the world have completely bypassed fixed web, and in many ways, I think the US is in some ways going to suffer from innovator dilemma.
We're going to go to the next slide.
Okay, innovator's dilemma, where we may not be the necessary leader around the world when it comes to mobile because there's no forcing function. You have consumers on mobile and that's the only device they've got.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I love this next slide, operating system platform shares.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're seeing here is, again, the reality. Everyone's talking about iPhone and Android. You kind of get a little dose of reality around the world of where these shares and these operating systems really stand. And this is a percentage of available impressions through these operating systems. So in North America, where the iPhone's taken off, you're at probably 40%, close to 40%, with Android at 10%.
38.2%.
38.2%, yeah. With Android at 10.4%. So we haven't necessarily seen, although we hear about the number of apps for Android equaling iPhone, we haven't yet seen advertising impressions flow in.
This is June 2010. If this was June 2009, what would this number be globally, or in the US?
Well, Android would have been 0. An iPhone probably would have been at best half, maybe less.
50%.
Would have been 20%. Half of 38.
Half of what it was.
Yeah. That's my guess. Yeah. So roughly speaking, you're seeing phenomenal growth rates. You're hearing a lot about Android. I still think there's a ways to go in terms of the availability of impressions catching up to iPhone. And then, the other thing that's interesting about this data is who's really competing with who. Again, we talked in the US about iPhone competing with, Android. But when you look at it at a global scale, it's like, okay, the price points of Android phones, they're really going after Nokia. And that's a much bigger market for Android to try to grab if you're Google around the world. iPhone's nascent around the world.
Numbers, is this percent of
percent of available impressions. Percent of impressions, just to be really clear.
And you have data on percentage if it were handsets as well, right? It's sort of unique.
It would follow relatively closely.
Would it? I mean, I assume that iPhone in particular are doing many more impressions because
so it would, iPhone is going to be closer to a 20% share on handsets because there's more impressions.
Yeah.
Okay? So so you're right, but it's still, from a market share perspective, iPhone in the Americas has substantial share now.
And then the next slide is, why don't you explain this to us?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is again, percent of available impressions around the world among iPhone. And I think what, again, is important to note is today, where we sit today, without any real penetration of iPhone outside, the US and Europe, you still have 40% going outside America. So as these handsets penetrate the rest of the world, you're quickly going to get to, I think, is most interesting about mobile, which is globalization.
Of all the iPhone impressions, I don't know why you had to, why iPhone? Why not Android? It's a better handset. But if all iPhone, I know why, because they dominate. But and sometimes popularity is more important than quality. But if you look at, I'm trying to get them. They're all in a food company.
Yeah, like, as an advertiser, popularity matters more to me.
I didn't even mean that. Seriously, they're all asleep. It's all dark and warm. But what this is it's of every 100 impressions on an iPhone, ad impressions that somebody creates, 61% of them are occurring.
4 of them are outside the US already. And again, the interesting thing for me is you're going to see you see.
Was it like 100, 90%?
Yeah, I would say 90% in the US.
Are you just guessing?
No, I would say anecdotally that's pretty good, 80, 90%. Okay. The reality is that the developers are sitting and seeing this happen. Yeah. So they're going to be the first ones to, I think, observe and experience globalization in mobile.
We're going to wrap up.
Which I think is the interesting point here.
What's the biggest growth market for you right now? Is it the US because you've just started touching down?
Yeah, it is, and Japan. So I haven't included Japan in this data, but we just launched in Japan. So as we roll this data out, and I get stability in market, you'll start to see Japan come online, South America come online.
Okay, last thing is, and I don't even know if this is still going, but we wrote about, you had some kind of competition a month ago. It wasn't a competition, it was just where, like, new developers, you were basically giving them 100% of revenue until you depleted was it a couple $1 million?
Yeah, so we basically...
Is that depleted now, or is that still going?
No, we're probably about 25% of the way through that.
Okay,
so I expect it to run out in 3 or 4 months.
If you're a developer, you can come and work with you and get 100% revenue share. And do you believe that's paying out more than your competitors?
I believe so. I mean, absolutely I do. I think the reason...
give a firm yes on that.
The reason is, I don't know their data. I know, however, that
I bet you have their data.
We're an opportunity. We're an opportunity for them to monetize that 40% of traffic outside the US. That's the main reason why it works for them. Okay. Because you really don't have that opportunity through most other networks.
And then they can leave after the fund's depleted if they want to.
They could,
okay. All right, hey, thanks very much for this.
Yeah,
Really
thank you.
All right, great.
And we'll keep sharing data. So.